My name is Benita Kropman and I'm the founder of the Lyno method. I come from a physiotherapy background, and for the past 3.5 decades, I've been focusing mainly on sports injuries, both professional athletes and also fun athletes. In the early 90s, I became increasingly frustrated dealing with chronic injuries and with recurring injuries. I found that the conventional approach of diagnosing it according to the symptoms and then using the tools to treat the symptoms definitely did not help or did not work for chronic or recurring injuries. I needed to find a different way, and it was only when I started to look at the body holistically and testing the body from head to toe for strength and for mobility that I finally found that all these athletes presented with areas in their body where they had limited movement. So in these areas of limited movement, it seemed that the muscles, the joints, the ligaments, the neural tissue, the blood vessels, everything that was in that area became trapped and lost part of its function. So what happened now when we look at muscle is that if the muscles were trapped in that area and couldn't work properly, it meant that other areas and other muscles needed to overwork and overcompensate, and that is what was causing now all these chronic symptoms. So my main aim was, and I was experimenting a lot to try and get rid of the immobility in these other areas which was far away from the symptoms. And I started my conventional tools in the beginning, trying to use stretching, but everything stretched but these areas that were showing up as immobile. So it was in that time that I also got exposed to rolfing and started to use fascia release in these areas, and suddenly I had all the results that I was looking for. But now if we have to look at what caused these areas of immobility in the first place, and it was only in the recent years when we started to focus on the polyvagal system and looking at the autonomic nervous system that I actually realized exactly what was the cause of all these chronic symptoms and all these chronic recurring injuries. Now, when we look at the autonomic nervous system, this is the system that responds immediately when the mind or the body senses danger. So if there is an event that's perceived as dangerous by the mind or by the body, then we immediately activate the sympathetic nervous system, and that is the fight or flight part of the nervous system. So immediately we deal with that dangerous or maybe not dangerous situation, and then we move to the parasympathetic nervous system, where we restore the calm and the natural state of the body, the state in which we thrive. If, however, we are in the sympathetic nervous system state and the body decides or the mind decides that this danger is overwhelming and we will not be able to deal with it, we then move to the parasympathetic nervous system, but the dorsal part of it, and that is the part where we freeze. We freeze or we fawn and we become immobile. So in that first moment, we actually become emotionally and physically immobile, and we're just in a state of shock. Now, if this state continues, that is now where parts of the body remains immobile, parts of the body remains frozen, and these are the parts of the body that then carry the memory of all the old trauma. So when we are looking at these athletes or anybody with a chronic injury, chronic pain, and we find these areas in the body where movement is limited, then we know that those are the areas where old, either emotional or physical memories of trauma is stored. And it is our job now to help facilitate the release of that so that we can restore normal function and then obviously get rid of all these chronic injuries. And then how do we do that? Well, the first thing is with the Lyno method, our assessment tool is really the great essence of the Lyno method. And that is what helps us to see exactly where these areas are, where the old memory of trauma is stored in the body. So once we know that, now we access the parasympathetic nervous system and specifically the polyvagal system. Now the polyvagal system, if we activate or increase the tone of the polyvagal nerve, It means that we are then opening up the gateway for all these old trauma, stored memories of old trauma, to actually become resolved and move out through the ventral part of the polyvagal system so that we can restore calm, movement, and tranquility for the body again. For the body, the ability to actually connect. Not only emotional connection, but also physically to connect so that the whole body can connect and move and work as a whole again. So in the Lyno method, what we do is we use a very light stroke on the body in the specific areas where we found the immobility. We use a very light stroke so that we stimulate the neuroreceptors that's connected to the polyvagal system. We then use movement, so we show the brain that it's actually safe to move in that area. We use breathing, everything to calm down, to create an area of safety for the client. So no words needed, no discussion of anything. We're actually going to release the old memory, the memory of all these old traumas, by releasing it through the body, through the polyvagal system. And it's so interesting, we can almost see immediately in about 2, 3, 4 strokes and movements and sections of breathing, we actually see how movement comes back and how movement is restored in that area. And obviously all the entrapments of neural tissue, blood vessels, ligaments, joints, everything suddenly get that release, and movement and proper function is facilitated again. So that is the essence of the Lyno method, is we find out where all old trauma is stored. We then release it. We facilitate the release. So together with the client, as a team, we release it and we restore the movement back in the body. And then obviously afterwards, we condition and we strengthen. Now, it's also important to find out whether that trauma that's situated in that area, whether whatever caused that trauma, if it is still around or whether this is old trauma. Now, if this is old trauma, it releases very quickly. It's not trauma that's being fed all the time. But if it is old trauma that's still in the current situation of that client's life is still triggered, which means that the client is perhaps in another abusive relationship when we're looking at emotional trauma, or whether the child is still overtraining when playing tennis, or whether the mother is still carrying a far too heavy baby on her hip and her body hasn't got the strength to actually carry the baby. So if we are still in the habit of causing trauma, of triggering that trauma all the time, then we're going to have to deal with that. So in Lyno, we do pay quite a bit of attention to, are you still feeding that trauma? Are you still triggering it? Or is this just old trauma that we need to release and it will be gone because you are not triggering it anymore? So no, we are not talking about any of this. We are not psychologists. We're not going to deal with that part of it, but we are going to remind the client that if that trauma, the same kind of trauma, is still triggered all the time, then that is the area that they will also have to focus on, because then with us releasing that trauma, it will help, of course, but if they will trigger it and the same trauma will come back again, then obviously we are still in that chronic injury situation. So yes, so that's the essence of Lyno. If you have a chronic injury, if you have chronic symptoms, chronic pain, recurring injuries, come and let us have a look and do a proper assessment to see where it is situated in the body, and then help us or come to us so that we can help you and facilitate how to release all that old trauma and get the body into full function so that we can get you to not survive only, but to thrive and to reach your full potential, whether this is in sport or whether this is in any other area of your life. But let's not survive, let's move over and thrive.